Hey, hello. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. So thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Tom. I'm the Solutions Director of AvePoint. And together with me in today's session, it's Liam.
Hi everyone, I'm Liam Davison. I'm a strategic consultant with AvePoint.
So what we're going to do today is going to talk about guest user access in M365. Right, so we've been hearing a lot about feedbacks, confusions, problems. So we're thinking it's good to have this session to share, to unpack, what's the complexity about, and actually any solutions, any recommendations that we have accumulated over the years, right? So today in the next hour, we're gonna have a lot of learning, a lot of demos, a lot of discussions as well. And feel free to put your questions in the chat box. So actually we are monitoring it, and actually we'll get back to you as much as possible in the session. But if we cannot get back to you in the session, then we'll follow up with you after, right? So you will also receive the slide deck as well as the recording of the webinar. So you're all recovered, all well covered, okay? So the agenda today, actually we're gonna go through a few items, right, one by one, right? So about all these guest access. So we'll start with, okay, firstly, is external collaboration really a bad idea? Okay, so let's deep dive into it to see what's involved inside, right? And also what exactly is a guest? How does it work in teams and groups? And what about SharePoint and OneDrive, right? So we're gonna talk about the differences and the connections between these services as well. And also, the last but not least is how can you manage this at scale? Because M365 is meant to, to enable collaboration at scale. But how do we manage it? All right. So without further ado, let's move in. All right. So the first question is external collaboration a really bad idea? Okay. So this is what I've been hearing a lot when we have discussions with our customers, our partners, even and with Microsoft when they hear from the community, right? So there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt that's out there, right? Simply because probably we don't understand enough about it. That's why actually we have this fear, right? So people are thinking about, oh, wow, actually it's gonna be a lot of risk, right? So when I don't know what they're gonna do, so my security team will say no. So the conclusion will be, okay, probably not, no external collaboration, right? So that's the general feeling of most of us today. But the reality is actually we're doing this every day. We're doing external collaboration every day. So just think about it yourself, right? So how do you work with your customers, your partners, right? Your vendors, right? So depending on what industry and what role you're in. And how do you work on the same contract with them? You send email around maybe? That's external collaboration already, right? And we cannot shut down emails, obviously. And even if you shut down, then what about, all the services that's out there outside email, that's on the internet, right? People will go to Dropbox and other services, for example, right? You have no control over. So we are doing this every day already. And the question is, do you want to leave this to your users to decide when and how they do it? So that's the first question. And also once your data leaves your organization, what control do you have? Like where do they go? Like who will have access to it? Who will read it? How much control do you have around this? Okay. And do you know like what your external users are doing with your data? Also, those are the questions that's coming in, right? So that's why actually we are thinking, okay, it's good to have this webinar. We're gonna unpack a lot of these the complexities, right? So like why it's so complicated and what's so complicated about it. So let's just dive in, right? So today, we will give you a lot of takeaways to really go into the guest access because there's a lot of things that you can do on M365. Okay, so I'm gonna go into some of the screenshots over here just to show a quick idea about how you do the settings like in different areas. And later we're gonna do demo and do the walkthrough, right? So this is just to show you actually there are different level of settings you can go. So we know that M365 leverages Azure AD for the directory services, right? For all the accounts. So of course, actually we start from here. Just overarching, nothing about M365 yet. And we have like how guests can access and be invited. And the next level, within M365 itself, we also have the entire tenant level sharing settings. So this is the page. And down below, so into the specific services, we have the groups, right, and teams and SharePoint. So each one of them will have the corresponding settings, right? Different levels of choices, right? Whether it's very inclusive, you allow everyone in, or actually you're very restrictive. Probably you don't need, you don't do any external collaboration at all, right? A lockdown. So these are the different areas, and actually go into SharePoint. There's more granular specifics as well. Similar to like in Teams, you have more control, team specific as well. Right, so there's SharePoint again, and then a SharePoint, you can do like an all SharePoint level, and also all the like a site level, like individual sites. And also Teams, you have the team level as well, right? So you can see actually I'm going, the screen is very busy now, right? And I haven't finished yet, right? So yeah, there's also the new sensitivity label, which actually you can apply to each individual site, group, or teams. That also allows you to set up, okay, the guest access settings over here, all right? So you can see actually there's a lot of things you can do. That means a lot of flexibility. You can have very granular controls, but also the other side of the coin is actually a lot of complexity. All right, so let's dive in. So today, one of the aim of the session is actually to give you a more clarity around all these different moving pieces, all the puzzles, right? And then actually we're going to provide recommendations and solutions. So this is a quick update. Actually, it's been a while, but actually since we're doing this sessions, and we just share with you something actually makes the topic even more important. All right, so earlier this year, so all external sharing, like guest access on Teams, will be turned on by default. Okay, so let's say now you are about to look at onboarding on M365. So you're a new customer, you're setting it up. Once you set up, if you don't do anything, it's on by default. Everyone can invite guests. All right, so like what does that mean, right? What that would bring you. So that's a lot of the implication over here. That's why actually we need to pay closer attention. We need to understand this better. So actually this is just a quick update over here. And in order to understand more, actually we go like a piece by piece, right? So firstly, we go with, okay, so how does it work in groups and teams, right? Because yeah, we have a lot of services on M365, and actually they have different history, have a different different models as well. Later, we're going to talk about the differences and connections. So we go into groups and teams first. And groups and teams, actually, they came in after actually we have a mature Azure AD model, right? So they leverage the Azure AD B2B model. So let's understand this a little bit so we will understand better. And later when we do the demo, you will relate better, okay? So here, just to understand how does this guest model in Azure AD works. Okay, so maybe a bit of a diagram and also the illustration here. So in the beginning, this is before we have this Azure AD B2B, right? So we probably this is what a lot of organizations are still doing, like on-prem still, right? So so let's say, yeah, I'm working for Fabricant, and actually I need to work with Contoso on certain projects, and they have a site that I need to visit, so we can do collaboration over there. So what you would do probably is to set up a V- account. Those are virtual accounts. It's really like a real credential that's created in the Contoso domain with another set of password that I will receive. Right. So with this set of password, I can log into Contoso and I can access their site. So this is a kind of one way of doing it like traditionally, and probably now still on-prem. Okay. But doing this, one big problem is actually what if after I leave Fabricant, right? So like now I'm not a employee in Fabricant anymore. I still have the set of credential that's assigned to me in Contoso, right? So that creates the problem, right? So how does the Contoso admin know actually my account is already invalid. I'm not a partner anymore, and I should not have access to this environment anymore, right? So if you are a IT admin that's managing, these accounts, and your business asking you, help me create these virtual accounts for them to access my SharePoint site, for example, then yeah, this is the question you need to answer yourself. How do you control, right? And now with the Azure AD B2B, there's a new model, right? So instead of creating a Vdash account with the new like a set of password, right? So now it's only an object in as a reference. So a guest object in a Contoso Azure AD reference to my account in Fabricant, right? So it's a reference. It's not the actual account, and the authentication still goes through Fabricant. Okay, so every time I need to access a Contoso, I'll get kicked back to Fabricant AD to get authenticated and come back and access. Okay, so this actually will solve the problem we just mentioned just now, right? So hey, if my account becomes invalid, then yeah, automatically I cannot like go into a Contoso site anymore, right? Because I cannot log in over here. So one question maybe actually, yeah, you have it. So oh, then what? Yeah, will the object like the me object in Contoso AD be automatically invalidated or removed? Actually, no. Yeah, right. So at least I cannot log in. And how to get it out? Actually, that's a operational matter, right? So actually, it's something actually we can talk about later as well when we provide recommendations. So yeah, this is actually how it works. And the new model, apart from this authentication, can be done like in home domain and no separate credentials chaos to manage. We also have other benefits still, right, with the Azure AD, right? So all the conditional access you can still have as part of your entire like system. And also the centralized identity management means actually you have all the centralized control and reporting. So these are the benefits of Azure AD B2B that enable external collaboration on M365 today. Okay, and a bit of a side information if you're interested in the costing of it, right? So the details, actually we have a link reference over here. Once you receive the deck, you can read up. But high level, actually Microsoft has been very generous about giving out these licenses. So today it's 5-to-1 ratio, meaning actually if you have one license for M365 internally, then you are entitled to 5 guest user accounts, right? So that's pretty good, pretty general, right? So pretty generous. Okay, so let's just share this over here, details in the article over here. All right. So then, yeah, next is actually about the configuration already, right? So from here, actually, we're gonna move into the demo. So I think it's good to actually show you live in the environment to see where the areas actually you can navigate to manage and see how they work, right? So I'm gonna switch over to my demo screen. So this is the M365 Admin Center, right? So although they're different places, let's navigate together, right? So there are different places. So just now we mentioned everything starts from Azure AD, right? So let's get to Azure AD. So on this screen, so we go to Azure AD. And here actually we will have the overarching, the highest level of settings for the guest access. Okay, so we'll go to Azure AD. And then yeah, it's loading up external identities. So actually this is, although it doesn't say, but this is Azure AD B2B, we just mentioned just now, right? So it's over here, and also the settings is around on this page, right? So it will tell you about, okay, so like what kind of content, what level guest users have access to, right? So you can select most inclusive, then they will act as if it's part of just like your employees, like internal members. That's how they're going to access. Or actually most restrictive, they have like a very limited access. Okay, and how they can be invited and who can invite them, also different level of settings. So just to remind everyone, right? So this Azure AD is nothing M365 yet, right? So Azure AD can be used, like for different applications, Microsoft applications, and even outside Microsoft. But this one actually is a overall, so okay, into your organization, like guest account into your organization, like what you can do about it, right? So who can invite, for example, and also any, for example, further restrictions. So here, okay, so for example, you want to restrict by domain, right? So I have, as a demo, I put in, okay, AvePoint.com as a domain. So for example, now I cannot invite a guest user from AvePoint, right? So just new guest user, I can just show you a quick demo just to show actually it works. So I'll put like Tom over here. Then actually already, okay, so this is my my test just now, for example, like Shihao at that point over here. So I try to, it checks over here, like as if I can add, but that only means actually there's no duplicate in the directory over here, right? So let me just try to invite over here. Okay, so it's trying to go through and trying to check, but eventually it's going to be an error say, hey, you cannot, because there's already a restriction. And this is actually at the tenant level, at actually the Azure AD tenant level, right? So cannot do. Right, so this time is access. And now let's move one level down further back into M365. So now at Azure AD, now we're over here, and also layer by layer. Firstly, also at the M365 tenant level. Okay, so when I go into the settings and the organization-wide settings, and the first one is security and privacy, and there's one setting here for sharing. Okay, this is going to ask you, okay, so whether it's going to be like all user can add people as organization or only admins, right? So this one does not restrict admins. So assuming on Azure AD level is really all open, admin can do it, right? And now we talk about, okay, is it only be admin or everyone, right? So if you check this off, you check this box, it's going to be, yeah, all users can add, right? So this is the one area, tenant level. And next actually is about all the services within M365. So yeah, the first one, yeah, can be, yeah, the groups, M365 groups, right? Because the groups actually is the membership service that's going to govern a lot of services. It's like a tool chain that chains all the services together. And also it's also the membership services behind teams. So we start with the groups first, right? Here actually it talks about, okay, so are we going to let group owners to add people outside your organization? So this group owner is actually the owners of these groups. So now actually we're coming like one level down to this M365 groups over here. Okay, so this is one level. And then of course you will see that, okay, there's the team settings, then also there's the SharePoint settings over here, right? So teams over here as well, do we allow guest access? So all these are like a tenant level and also service level, like high level settings. And each service, so for example, down to teams, we have even more controls, even more granular, right? So we're gonna go into that now to see like what kind of additional control that we have. So for teams, we can just navigate to the Teams admin center. Okay, so this is where you set up all the things that's like specific to Teams services. Yeah, so yeah, it's loading. And yeah, once it's loaded up, on the left side, you're gonna see all the different areas. So yeah, one of them is the users, right? So the guest user, then we're gonna see, right? So by default, it's on. So this is the way we talked about just now, right? So if you set up a new tenant without doing anything, this is on, okay? This actually is give the convenience to everyone for the collaboration. But yeah, on means actually all these things are on as well, and actually users can come into your teams and potentially see your content. So yeah, you got to know like what's on and actually what's provided over here. And there's a quick link that's pretty good actually over here. I'll just show you that actually go through a checklist for like giving access eventually for guest accounts to your teams. So this is a really good checklist. Actually, we're already going through most part of it, if not all of it, right? So starting from Azure AD, so we won't go into details today to reading this document. So you're gonna, we have a reference in the deck and you can come back to this as well, okay? And in addition to all these, to just on and off, you can also have, okay, so what about calling like a Teams, the meetings, the messages? So what you can turn on and off for your users, right? So this is all more specific control to Teams. Okay, and this is for Teams at actually the entire Teams tenant level or Teams service level. And this is one level down. You might have question, okay, so what about restrictions like a per team or per group, right? So, okay, fortunately, you don't see that on the UI, admin UI over here. You have that on through PowerShell or APIs. So I'll show a bit of a control as well. So I pre-load up actually my PowerShell window. So I won't bore you. Actually, we have a really wide audience today, so we won't bore you line by line over here. So what we're doing here is actually to set restrictions per group, like per team, right? So I'll show you from teams, like what it looks like. So this is my teams, right? Just do a bit of refresh. And actually from teams, actually I can now, because it's all turned on, right? So I can just invite my guest in and tell actually to allow them to participate, right? So for example, I go into any team, I add members. So let me just add anyone, right? So let me see, for example, I just still use one of my colleagues, Suhail's the AvePoint account, right? So it's loading. Yeah, obviously there's not an internal account. It's asking me, are you willing to add this as a guest? All right, so it seems actually to go through, right? Although I hit add, I'll be blocked because there's a tenant restriction over there. That means the domain restrictions. So going through the step means actually it's taking the guest, right? So let me just switch to, okay, like for example, retail. So all these are the same, right? So all these are the same settings. Is now it's all open, right? So still it's accepting all the guests over here, right? So now what I'm going to do is to show you some of the PowerShell scripts actually we can run to do the settings. So I've done some like a quick comments. Actually, for those actually idea admins, PowerShell fans, you're gonna love it to run this script. So basically, for the first time you run this to do the setting, but actually later when you toggle on and off, you run these two blocks, right? So I've done this before, right? So actually, I'll just run this. Okay, I want to turn this off. So yeah, actually allow to add the guest access to false, right? So let me run this. Okay, so let's go. Right, so hopefully this connects, right? So actually executes. And after this is turned off, I can do a quick validation of whether it's true or false. So actually now it's turned to false, right? So for those of you familiar with PowerShell, you know actually the setting already works for this retail group over here, right? So now let's come back to retail. I want to add members. Actually, it does not recognize all the like a guest anymore. Right, so actually try to spin and spin and spin. Actually, that it doesn't know like where to go, right? So I cannot hit enter or do anything. So now retail restricted, but if I go back to communications, another group, another teams, actually this will still work, right? So let's do how, right? So actually, yeah, it's spin and spin. Actually, you ask me, do I want to add this user as a guest because it's outside my organization? So yeah, I can go through. That means now I can differentiate. Okay, more restrictive and also yeah, more open groups. Okay, but unfortunately, this is only available on PowerShell today. So depending on how comfortable you are, actually, that's native. Actually, how it can be provided, right? So if you want to go ahead and add, I'm going to hit an error for sure. Okay, so because right of the yeah, if actually we're in this is a webinar, right? If it's actually we're in the conference room and we're gonna do some quiz. So hey, yeah, why, right? So actually because of the restriction over here. Okay. Okay. All right. So much about like Teams and OneDrive. Actually, yeah, no, the Teams one by one. So just now while we have unpacked, so I'll move back a little bit to the slides to give you an idea, right? So they are layer by layer. So what are the layers, right? So we start from the core, which is the Azure the restrictions, and then at the M365 level, there's the security and privacy setting. Remember, actually, the first one asking you, okay, whether it's only admins or everyone, and also then groups governance, groups, teams, and yeah, even the groups connected SharePoint sites, and also yeah, the SharePoint settings, which we're gonna move on and go into a bit later. Yeah, and team settings over here, right? So these are all the different settings. And actually, this is the checklist. We have a reference over here, which actually will lead to the article we just showed you just now. Okay, so this is layer by layer. So hopefully this has given you a good idea about actually, yeah, all the different areas, and hopefully it has some clarity. Then yeah, I'll be very happy. Okay, so here's the areas, and also one part that we haven't touched upon actually is the sensitivity labels, right? So that's something actually that's relatively new as well. So you can create sensitivity labels that can be applied to groups and the sites. And this allows you to set up the guest access as well. But this one actually, yeah, there's also some considerations that we want to highlight over here, right? So firstly is actually it relies on the requester to select, okay, what labels do I apply to the site, right? I can decide. Then for me to, yeah, as a business user, I probably just find the easiest option now, open to everyone, so less trouble later, right? If I'm allowed to. And then yeah, anyone can change, or actually anyone can become an owner and change. Actually, I'm just putting the 2 points together. So owners can make changes to the label, yeah, then the corresponding changes, right? And then the anyone can potentially become an owner. And actually, this also does not really impact the associated SharePoint sites, right? Because if we apply this to Teams, yeah. So some consideration over here for your information. And yeah, actually, we can do a quick conclusion of the Teams part, right? So so far we covered the Azure AD and actually how groups and teams can work. And next, actually, we're going to go into another part is SharePoint and OneDrive. So you may wonder actually like why we're doing this distinction over here, right? So like why like two different? It sounds like the two different parts. And as we put in the slide, right? It's like they are like the two different models. So the teams and groups actually they leverage Azure AD B2B. Okay, as we walked through just now. Okay, so this is something that this newer than SharePoint. SharePoint existed like before this model came about, right? So SharePoint OneDrive, they have a different model. So each model have some settings and controls, and there's some overlap as well, but they're completely independent. That's where some of the complexity comes in as well. So yeah, they are again, yeah, overlap, but independent. Later, I'll show you some interesting settings over there. So this is actually what it is, and this gives you, yeah, probably some of the fear and doubt and yeah, worry that we shared earlier in the session actually came from this part as well, right? So so SharePoint and OneDrive, they are not built on Azure AD B2B. Okay, they existed earlier. And the model actually is meant to be decentralized. So if you came from like a SharePoint on-prem world, you probably will be familiar with this as well. So SharePoint settings, they are applied at the site collection level. Okay, so yeah, very distributed. If you have 1,000 site collections, then you have 1,000 places to manage all these. And you have like these like Azure AD and SharePoint. Yeah, you're not really like applying double over here. Actually, they're independent. You can probably force some centralization here. So for example, right, for external share on SharePoint, you can restrict it. Say, hey, only share to those admin-controlled guests, right? And then you have a connection with Azure AD. So later we're gonna talk about this. So again, now I'm gonna move into the demo over here. Instead of just the slides. So coming back to the admin center for the M365. So remember the screen just now, tenant level and services level, and SharePoint is also one of the services over here. Okay, and it will also still ask you, okay, whether you allow everyone or you have more restrictions. So this is like a very high-level general settings. And also a quick note over here from Microsoft. Actually, this is a very friendly shortcut. So it tells you, oh, then if you want more restrictions, more specifics, go to SharePoint Admin Center. So let's go there right now. Okay, so this will give you both SharePoint and OneDrive. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty nice over here, right? You can just slide around. So this one and this one actually are in sync. So if you do like a new and existing guest, if you do a save here, yeah, let me just do a refresh. I didn't save anything, right? Just do a refresh. then actually you're going to see that automatically it comes down. Okay, so although they're different places, but they're in sync. This actually solves some of the big problems, right? Otherwise, it actually will you have more confusions. But actually, there are some specifics. OneDrive, you can have a different level. So this is always in sync. The SharePoint bar is always in sync with this one, but OneDrive, you can have a different level over here, right? And notice actually, OneDrive cannot go beyond SharePoint, right? You can only just go just as open as SharePoint, cannot be more. So okay, at least you have some cap over here. Okay, and more specifics, then you have all these links, all the folders, actually how they they can be shared, and also a lot of this. If you click open this, can more controls to see. Do you want to limit external domains and others, right? And you probably notice one thing interesting: domains, right? And remember the Azure AD, I restricted one domain as well. Then what about SharePoint? I see no domain over here, okay? So now actually it's not restricting any domain. So this is where some of the complexity comes in, okay? We talked about, okay, Azure AD, SharePoint, they are independent, okay? This is where the independence part. So if I go to a group, go to a team, I add, okay, Suhao at AvePoint.com, it's gonna be, blocked because, sure, the teams actually leverages actually Azure AD directly. SharePoint, it's separate. Now if I go to like any SharePoint site, right? So if I just put in, so for example, I just put in the SharePoint sharing. I do any sharing over here. I can probably even do myself. Actually it will accept. So okay, ask me whether to send email. Yes, send email. It goes through. So actually this one, it will, once I, you don't see here because I need to still receive the email and accept the invitation and come in, right? So we don't go through that process, but it accepts, right? So you can see that actually there's some actually disconnect, if you will, between the groups Azure AD and SharePoint over here. And interestingly, if you go to a SharePoint site that's group connected, you have more control. Actually, more control and flexibility. All right. So let's say this is another site, Project X, site permissions. Now I want to add members. Yeah, the name of the button actually is different because it's group connected. Now I have two options. I hope I'm not confusing you over here, right? So now, do you want to add a member to the group, or do you want to share the site only? This is actually where you have the choice over here. So share the site only, you go through the traditional SharePoint way, the old model, right? So the restrictions comes from this SharePoint settings page. But if you want to share to add the member to the group, then actually that's where you will actually have the restrictions from the Azure AD level. So this is how it is now. Microsoft is continuously doing an upgrade, so hopefully it will become like even like a better later. But now actually you can see that I can somehow control the group access, the SharePoint site access from Outlook. Where I add a member, I just invite members over here. So if I do again, actually if I just invite, okay, like for example, still I'm using the same account, right? So I invite Suhao. Actually, you're about to do so, right? Let me try to add. So this actually I'm gonna hit some errors because we have some limitations over here, right? So it does not go through. But if I do like a Gmail or actually other like proper domains, it will go through, right? So let's say let me do Tom. Hopefully, let me just type okay, Sihao. Okay, Sihao's Gmail. All right. Okay, let me do this. Gmail. Right. So we do this, and actually we go, and this will go through. So there's a Gmail account. Actually, this is another domain, not restricted. It will go through. Right. So just to show you a little bit about control. Okay, now group, and this actually reflects back to this group connected site. Right. So I'm in the group, I'm in the site. So inside this one, actually, we're going to go into this. So you can see a lot of complexity coming in over here, right? So hopefully this actually will give you an idea, at least to the areas for SharePoint as well. And again, actually, some of the things on particular to SharePoint is because they're using an old model, right? So this is actually something actually you can do. And at per site level, you can also do a separate setting. So that's actually, this is a good thing actually you can do within the GUI, right? So for those who of you actually don't really like the PowerShell. So this is actually how we can do from from the native controls over here. So the external sharing, you can add it per site over here. Okay. So yeah, we've been through quite a bit of a complexity over here, and actually it all boils down to how we're gonna look at this, how we understand it. So yeah, AvePoint, we've been working with like SharePoint from day one, M365 from day one. We see a lot of confusions, complexity here, and our job actually is to try to make it easier for you, right? So um, to firstly to give some general recommendation, how do we actually make it easier to understand this better? Yeah, we just recommend you think about these four aspects first for your organization, right? So who do you want to collaborate with externally, right? Is it your partners? And which team is doing this? Is going to be entire organization or just specific project? And actually, what kind of services and data, like, should I have access to? I do want to share, right? So Teams, is it only chat or files as well? Do you want to do the sharing on SharePoint and OneDrive? So all these are actually considerations. And just how should users be invited in, right? Is it controlled centrally by IT, which is actually maybe more restricted, more secure in a way, but actually, yeah, it makes IT the bottleneck, and also you have the risk of a user going into other means, right? Or actually just open up a little bit, or like everything, and actually potentially inviting a lot of guests in that you have to deal with. And also, yeah, like when is actually about the life cycle management, right? So how do you get them out when they, don't need to be in the system anymore, right? So these are the things to consider. And one thing we didn't really, one dimension I didn't really consider actually is how do you manage this at scale, right? So we're not talking about like one site, like one user of a OneDrive, right? So it's going to be hundreds of users, thousands of users, and a lot of SharePoint sites and teams and groups are going to be curated, right? So how do you manage that scale? So from this point on, actually, my colleague Leon is going to share with you some of the best practices and good solutions for you to manage at scale, right? So over to you, Leon.
Thanks, Tom. So let me just get my screen up for everyone. And I will continue from there. So yeah, so Tom's shown us some really awesome controls that Microsoft have given us to be able to enable this external collaboration. But what you would have noticed is that most of the controls we've walked through are either at an entire tenant level or at a service level. And if you want to get down to that more granular level, you have to get your hands dirty with PowerShell. So what I'm going to walk everyone through is really how actually can AvePoint help you sort of simplify this landscape. So if you think about, who and where do you need to actually collaborate with? So Tom's shown us some, some capabilities there around restricting domains. But another thing again is that, so the first lot of domain restrictions he showed us was in Azure AD, and the other set was within SharePoint itself. But they're sort of their global settings, right? So that means if you put those domain restrictions on in those two locations, then there's no way of sharing with those domains at all. So you actually want to consider, are there certain scenarios where I want some people to be able to share with this domain, but I don't want others to? So these are all the sorts of questions that you need to actually ask yourself. How do you actually want to onboard new external users? So what's the process? As Tom said, are you going to open it up to everyone to be able to invite anyone in at any time they like, or are you going to lock it down? And again, with the native tools, it's either on or off, right? So it's everyone can do it, or only admins can do it. So again, I'll walk you through some of the options there of how to handle that. And then the sort of that final point that Tom was making was, what do you do with the life cycle of guests? So what happens when your external user actually doesn't require access anymore? How do you actually deal with that scenario? So a lot of you are probably sitting there thinking, yep, I really need a process for being able to provision and manage and the provisioning and management and life cycle of my guest users. And you might be wondering, how can you actually transform your process from something that looks a bit like this, which is sort of what Microsoft is expecting of you when they come in and say, yes, we're going to turn everything on by default and let everyone do everything. But you want to actually get from something a bit like this to something a bit more like this, where there's a nice process. User submits a request to invite a guest in. There's some sort of an approval process around that. Once it's approved, the guest will get added into your Azure Active Directory as a guest. It'll get granted the access to the relevant resources it needs. And then it's going to go into like this renewal process here. So it's just going to sit there dormant for whatever the defined period is, let's say 3 months. And then it's going to create a renewal task. So this sort of, it ensures that you don't have stale guests, let's call them. So it's enabling you to sort of clean out the guests that no longer require access. So there's a range of different topics here, and across the suite of AvePoint products, I'll touch on a few different products that we've got that sort of address a lot of these needs. So one of the first ones that I'm going to actually cover off is specifically around the actual invite process. So utilizing our cloud governance tool, I'm actually going to show you what it looks like to actually create a service request. So we have a lot of control over the actual invite process when we do this. So when we actually configure these processes, we can configure things like a renewal profile. We can configure what fields on the screen the users need to fill out. And we actually have the ability to capture some information that actually gets stored straight back into Azure Active Directory as well. So things like, who the manager is. So, it's a long-running problem. Almost every customer I've ever gone to, you go in and you're trying to do some sort of an approval process when you're dealing with managers, and managers are all over the place. But what this allows us to do is actually, as part of that invite process, you can actually nominate who the manager of this external person is, and it will actually set the AD manager field of that guest user. So there's a couple other fields that we can access along the way as well. So when we define this service request, we then sort of define what our renewal is. So you can sort of see from the screen here, we can set things like, how frequently do we want this process to run? How many days are we going to give the task assignee to actually complete this task? Who do we want to complete this task? And then we can define things like, so we have this concept called contacts. So basically what we're doing is we're enabling the business to say, these two people are responsible for this guest. So it's up to them now to manage the life cycle of this guest. So when we do those renewal tasks, we send the renewal task to them because they're the ones that are actually working with those external users, and they know, yeah, this external user is still active or this one's not. So you're taking that that job away from IT and sort of reducing some of that bottleneck in IT, and sort of actually giving the responsibility of managing the guests to the actual business users. And we can also collect a whole bunch of custom metadata in these requests as well. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you a demo at this point of actually inviting a guest user into the environment. So I'm just going to bring this one over here. And you can see this. So this is our cloud governance product. I've got a bunch of different requests in here, but we're going to focus on this guest user one for now. And once I've gone through this request, I'll then actually also show you the end result where the user account appears in Azure Active Directory. So as an end user, I would come in and fill out this form. So it also allows me to do multiple guests in one go as well, which is a recently added feature. So what we'll do here is we'll say, I'm going to add my Gmail account in here for today. So, and you can also see that some of these fields are mandatory as well. So we can also control, what level of information you're actually collecting about your guests. So with a lot of the native methods of inviting a guest in, all you need is the email address and that's it. Whereas using this process, we can actually enforce better data about your guest users. So we can actually make your users provide more information. So I'm going to invite this particular user to my environment. And you'll notice as well over on the side there, I get this little green tick. So as you saw with some of Tom's examples, this is actually going back and checking, does this account already exist in my Azure Active Directory, or is there some sort of restriction? And one of the other things that I didn't mention in the config screen, but one of the things that we can actually configure in the service request here is we can actually do the domain restrictions. And so what that means is rather than actually doing a domain restriction at an entire organization level, you can actually have different service requests. Assign the different service requests different permissions. So you might have, department A, HR department, has one process, and the IT department has a different process. So they can each have their own service request that actually have different domain restrictions on them. So rather than sort of just having a blanket across your entire environment, you can actually start getting really granular. The other thing that we can do also in this guest process is we can actually add the guest to groups or teams here as well. And I'll get a bit more into the teams and groups a bit later, but what this is doing is it's allowing this current person logged in to add this guest into any groups or teams where they have been set to allow guests, and where the current user is actually in a level of permissions where they're allowed to be adding guests in. You can also customize the welcome message that gets sent to the guest. And let's just put in here. So we'll fill out all my mandatory fields. As I mentioned before, you can actually specify the manager, and this will actually populate the AD manager field. So let's just go select a user there. Specify my contacts. I'll pick my metadata here. And this metadata can be useful for reporting on, and you can do exports of the guest users and everything. So I'm just going to hit save now. So I could go and add more guests in, but for this demo, I'm just going to stick with one, and I'm going to hit submit. Now, depending on whether I had an approval task on this or not will depend on what happens here. So obviously I've got this on automatic approval at the moment. Had I had an actual approval process attached to this, you would have actually seen who the approval task was assigned to. But I can see that's actually gone through and that's actually finished that invitation process now. So if I jump over into my Azure Active Directory and go and have a look at my users now, I can see there's that liamjd@gmail account that I added in. So let's open that one up and have a look. So we can see, now I haven't actually accepted the invite yet, so I can see that the invitation hasn't actually been accepted yet. But I can see that it's populated these fields for me. So I can see the manager field's been populated, the company name's been populated. I didn't fill out any of the other details there. So once that user then goes and accepts that invitation, they're then added into the Azure Active Directory as a guest. And you can see the user type here is guest. So what I'll do now is I'll just jump back over to my slides. So as you can see, it's actually really easy now for end users to be able to invite guests into the environment, but you've got control around it. So rather than this sort of free-for-all that Microsoft's given you before, you can now actually have process around it. So what I didn't show you in that demo, which I'll get to, by inviting that guest in through this process, I've actually now assigned a renewal profile to the guest. So what that means is, let's just jump back into here. So I'm going to go into the admin side of the governance portal now, and I'll show you what you can see for the guest users. So by having the renewal profiles on there, like I said, so we've got a periodical process, and what that renewal does is it creates a task on the defined frequency for those contacts, so the people responsible for this guest, and it'll say to them, hey, does this guest still need access in your environment? And they can say yes or no. They can actually remove the account from AD if it's not required anymore. And then it'll then show them all the different teams and groups that this guest has access to, and it gives them an opportunity to add or remove them from particular groups and teams. So if I go to my guest user report, so you can see there's that guest that we invited in just before. And if I just add a few extra columns onto here, there's a whole bunch of information that we can see here. So depending on what sort of metadata is configured in your environment, I'll just turn those extra fields on for now. So I can see now that this particular account is going to be due for renewal on the 1st of December 2021. So I've got mine set to a pretty short renewal cycle by the looks of it. And so what that'll mean is that the primary and secondary contacts here will get that task on that date. But as admins, you can come in here now and you can actually do exports of these reports. So you can get a list of all the people that have been invited into your environment. And you'll even get a little status here as well. So you can see the little picture of the broom means that that user doesn't exist anymore. They've been removed from Azure Active Directory, but we still keep the record here that they were once upon a time in your environment. So the other thing to note as well with these tools is that you might be going, oh, this is great for all the new guests that we're going to invite from this point on. But what about all our existing guests? So our products do cater for that. So we do have an import process where it can actually import any guests that already exist in your environment, and then it can then apply these renewal profiles to them. And when you actually get a renewal, so what will happen is that you'll get a task so we've got an app within Teams, and when you click on the renewal task, it'll go through this process here where you can either go through the actual renewal, and if you go through that, it'll then show you, as I said, so it's going to show me all the different teams and groups that guest is a member of, and it will give me an opportunity to actually remove the guest from any of those teams, so you can click the X there. Or if you look up in the sort of top ribbon on the left, there's actually remove from organization. So if I actually don't want the guest in my environment at all anymore, I can hit that button there and that will remove them. Once you hit submit, if you do go through with that, that'll actually complete that renewal process. So another point that Tom sort of touched on before as well was that what happens sort of when you have guests, it's maybe legacy guests from past times in your environment, and they've since been removed from any groups or teams. They're not actually directly members of anything anymore, but their account's actually still sitting in your Active Directory as a guest. So with the use of our policies for a Microsoft 365 product, we've actually got the ability to configure some rules against various different services within your environment and at the tenant level as well. So what you can see here is we've actually got this thing called ghost user detection. And so what that's going to do is that's going to find guest users who actually aren't members of any particular group. But they're still in your environment. And it will then give you the ability to automatically remove them or just sort of flag a violation and you can get a report of them. You'll also notice there's a remove inactive guests one there as well. So we can actually set a rule and say, if the guest user hasn't logged in for, let's say, 90 days, then just block their access and delete them. Because if they haven't logged in that period of time, then we don't want them in here anymore. And you can see so that there are options here. So this tool can automatically fix some of these problems by actually going ahead and deleting those users, or it can just send a notification out. So we've already gone through that demo there. So I'm going to cut this section quite brief because I know we've only got about 5 minutes to go, and we do want to have an opportunity to answer some questions. But what I've shown you so far is how you go about managing the actual guests themselves. But a lot of the points that sort of Tom touched on was around the different services, so Teams and Groups and OneDrive and SharePoint. And what one of the demos that he did was around using PowerShell to enable guest access on a specific team. So with our governance product, we actually have the ability to create standardized policies and provisioning processes. So you can essentially have approval workflows where a user can come in, request a team, it can go through some sort of an approval process. Now that might be that it goes to their line manager, or it might go to a specific AD group of people who are in charge of approving teams, whatever the process is that fits your organization. And so once it's gone through that approval, the AvePoint tool will then actually provision the team for you, and then it will apply the policies. Now, the policies that we have cover things like, is external sharing enabled or not? Are guests allowed in this team or not? We can even set things like what's the storage quota of this site and so on. So by utilizing these tools, we can then start actually getting quite granular. So you can actually have a different service request for each different kind of team that you're going to provision. So you might have, an internal team and an external team for the different sharing settings. And then you apply these different policies to them. And also through the use of what we call a questionnaire, you can then sort of start asking your users basic questions, and then you can guide them towards the correct service request that they should be filling out based on the answers to their results, to their questionnaire. So that's just sort of a brief glimpse at some of the settings that we have available to us within the cloud governance product. So as you can see, we can configure the sharing settings here. And one of the most important things is, so as Tom showed you, there's so many different places within the environment that you can actually configure these guest settings. By implementing these processes with AvePoint, you disable it everywhere in Office 365, and then you just have one process. You manage it through cloud governance, which makes it nice and simple and easy for you to maintain. So there's a whole range of different settings that we can configure here, conditional approvals. And like I said, the huge benefit here is that you can actually then start having different standards for different parts of the business. You don't have to have a one size fits all for your entire organization. So with that being said, so that renewal process as well, that we actually apply those renewal processes to the actual Teams and SharePoint sites as well. So not only are your guests now being managed, but also your actual collaboration spaces are also now being managed. And they go through a similar renewal process as well. We've then also got so tenant-wide monitoring as well. So we've got a tool called Insights. And what this does is this actually scans your environment. It'll come back and tell you, you've got this many external users in your environment, and you can drill down into that report and see where those users come from. It's also going to find things like, if you've got any external links, anonymous links in your environment. So we'll probably know that one of the things that SharePoint is great at is anonymous links. So people can send links out where you don't need any sign-in to access it. And then we've also got what we call sensitive items as well. So this will sort of, based on some criteria that configure in the system, it'll find things like there might be, credit card numbers or IP addresses or something that is quite sensitive information. It'll then give you this dashboard here, which allows you to drill in and see, what external users have access to this sensitive information, for example. And then you can actually then start, working out how you actually manage that risk within your organization. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to sort of recap what we've sort of covered today. So we've gone through, is external collaboration a bad idea? What is a guest user? How does it work? and sort of how you can sort of manage that at scale with AvePoint. So I'll just, we're due for time now. So what I'll do is I might just answer one or two of these questions, and Tom, feel free to jump in as well. And then anything that we don't get around to, we can certainly get some answers out to you with the decks later. So there was a question earlier on in the session about can you make the settings so that normal users or team owners cannot add someone, but they could be added by an admin or Azure Logic app? So yeah, absolutely. So one of the benefits of the AvePoint products is that obviously you can restrict all your settings so that your end users aren't allowed to add guests anywhere. And then you can use that, either that invite process that I showed you, or some of the other policies within the product to actually define where and who can actually add guest users in. Another question that we had was, does the manager of the external person integrate with the M365 tenancy management? So in regards to that question, if you're referring to the AD manager field within that I showed you in the guest user demo, yes, it does integrate into M365 because it is actually the Azure AD manager field. So anywhere where that information from Azure AD flows through, it will utilize that. So we're sort of out of time there. So if you want to sort of read one of our ebooks, scan the QR code there, and it's a really good read. It goes into a lot more detail about a lot of the topics we've been discussing today. And as we mentioned, we will be sending out the recording and the slide deck afterwards. So thank you everyone for attending today.
Yep. Thank you everyone. Have a nice day.